Why did we sell the council housing off? Why didn't we sell off Durham Cathedral?
See, my favorite object for selling off, this is after we become a republic, is
Yes.
Buckingham Palace. We sell that off and we give the Queen a nice council house instead. That,
We sell Buckingham Palace, and it's a solution to all the crises we've got in the monarchy. And I'm
yep.
sure the Queen wants a break. We'd give her a really lovely, just a really
We
beautiful
give a top
council
quality
bungalow.
council house. We are very
Yeah,
kind.
a bungalow or something. This time, let me just prepare myself for doing an intro. Okay, I'll do an intro. Right. Okay. Okay. So hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm Suze. Today I'm joined by Professor Monojit Chatterji, and we're going to try and help you understand the stuff that's really important that's happening in the economy right now. And today we're going to talk about debt. So I'll welcome Monojit, who you are familiar with. Monojit Chatterji is a professor of economics, been at Cambridge, currently at the College of Humanities. He's a really good person to chat to, so I'm really glad that he'll join me today. Thank you. Hello, Monojit. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing fine, thank you.
I've noticed an addition to your facial composure since we last.
Oh right, the lockdown look, as it were.
Good look. I really like the lockdown look. Got a beard.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
This was influenced by the various ladies in my life.
Oh, was
Yeah.
it? So it's a stylistic choice. It's not
Yes,
like a.
chiefly by my youngest daughter, who sort of I hadn't shaved for 3 or 4 days, and then the stubble appeared. She said, "Oh, it looks cool. You should do something about it."
It does.
So
I really
yeah,
like it.
well,
Yeah.
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 So I did. I had a Karl Marx kind of beard when I was young, a student.
Modelled on Karl Marx.
Yeah, yeah, very big,
I
huge, big
didn't.
thing.
I didn't think you were a Marxist, Monojit.
Well, he was a big. I was a big fan of his. I'm not a Marxist. I don't think I agreed with his analysis. I agreed with his values. If you see what I mean.
I
So
think I
I
do, and I
agreed
think
with
we shouldn't discuss this
with
too much.
his.
Yeah, but it's difficult, isn't it? Because actually, if you read Marx, and some of it is so interesting and so philosophical and like
That's and it's a,
interesting.
yeah, and it's the philosophical part that I found kind of okay. I just didn't
Yeah,
think that I didn't think his analysis that capitalism was doomed was particularly helpful, and turned
yeah.
out historically to not be true. And I think he underestimated how well it adapts to circumstance.
I feel like we need to stop this conversation. It's going to be like us discussing mine. Also, I don't even. Yeah, let's just leave it there for now. But anyway, we. That's a big topic, isn't it? Marxism. And
It's a huge topic, but I think there is no doubt whatsoever that even people who don't agree with the analysis, who are deeply influenced by the ideas, by the sense of social justice and things like that, which many people I know share.
yeah, yeah, and I guess the difficulty I have at the moment is I've been reading loads of stuff about communist China, and I can't even deal with the language. Although what Marx, and that's where you got to distinguish between some of the writings and the ideas and the implementations, and you could argue that they're completely separate, but it's difficult. There's a big debate. In fact, let's not. I think we'll.
Yeah, yeah.
I think
No, I agree.
even the language of
Yeah.
it makes me like reading about all these
Well, no,
executions.
it is problematic. The
Yeah.
language of discourse is not easy.
And unfortunately, we're using all that same language today, which makes me really nervous about some of the way that terms that have been used to such horrific, violent effects are being
Yeah,
reused, even though you might not intend that to be how they're used. If that's how
yeah,
they have been used and people have died in our lifetimes using that same language, it makes me quite nervous.
yeah.
So anyway, yeah, there's Marx. We've done that one, or we haven't really. But anyway, we're going to talk about debt. So we've got 3 questions we're going to try and focus on today. First one is,
Okay.
what is it? What is debt? Second one is, how much debt are we in? Is it a problem? Third one is, what can we do about it? What do we need to think about it? What are the government's options? That sort of thing. So first question, what do you think debt is, Monojit?
It's okay. So that is the accumulation. It's accumulation of our of an individual. Let's start with an individual. An individual's spending, if you like, over their income. So
Okay.
think of spending minus income in a given year or in a given time period. So that's your flow of deficit in a given year. Keep
For an
adding up all
individual.
these numbers,
Yeah.
keep adding them up year by year, and you get the stock of debt. So it's important to distinguish between the stock and the flow. So the debt is, simplest way to think about it is that each time I run an annual deficit, so it's like water entering a bathtub. Okay, so water coming in, if you like, is expenditure.
Hmm.
Water going out through the plug hole is, if you like, is income. And if your expenditure is bigger than your income, then the water level in the bath keeps rising.
Hmm.
So the level of the bathtub at the end is your debt, the stock of debt.
Great. Okay, that's really helpful because it shows we've got a definition that for now can work for both individuals and for
Absolutely.
governments. Yeah.
But it
So that's
should
really
work. It should be the same. It should work for individuals, for governments, for nations, for everybody. It's
yeah.
yeah, it's a simple idea. It's how how big, how large is this bathtub?
Yeah.
And to think about it another way, think about this in your own home. So if your bathtub gets too full of water, then it gets awfully heavy and the floorboards burst and you end up going through the floor into your neighbors. I'm talking about people like you and I who live in flats, you see.
I've
you
had
end up
leaks in my
you end up in
bathroom
your neighbors because the
almost every.
water's
I haven't got a bath, but anyway, my shower.
sorry?
But can we just so that but that wouldn't be a problem if you had so much money coming in, it was overflowing in the form of in our debt analogy. That'd be pretty good actually. If your income, if the money flowing in was just loads and loads and loads.
I know. At one level it sounds,
Is that
so
how you've used the analogy? You've used it as the flow in to your bath is your
flow in,
income.
no, the flow, okay, so the
Okay, I
flow in,
wasn't listening properly. Go
so
say
the
it again
flow
then.
out, yeah, so
Okay.
the flow out is income, the flow in is expenditure. So there's too much expenditure when the bathtub fills.
Okay. It seems counterintuitive when you've got the bathtub analogy to do it that way round.
Yeah, I know, but otherwise you would think about it the other way
Yeah,
probably.
which I
But
just
I
did.
think for the
Okay, so yeah,
bathtub, since yeah, so the size of the bathtub is the size of your total debt,
yeah, okay. Now
the amount of
people are
water
going
in
to
the
go, and
bathtub.
I know that. Oh, by the way, hello, whoever's watching. I think we've got people watching who are going to mix of some Monojit students. We're going to have a mix of people that are following me, and it's going to be a real mix of people thinking about this. And I know that people are already going to be angry. Not everybody. I know a few of you at home are going to be angry that we're comparing household debt with government debt because there are differences in how they operate and the choices that individuals have compared to government. But we're going to get to that later, aren't we? For
Yeah,
now, we're
yeah,
just
absolutely.
conceptually we're saying there's a conceptual similarity because both
Yep,
individuals and governments and businesses and big financial corporations all have this same phenomena, which is that you have some stuff flowing in and some stuff flowing out.
true. The difference is that the individual has huge constraints on how much they can borrow in the market. We have to go through 1001 checks and be mortgage approved and all this huge government has, and ultimately we don't have the right to issue money.
Individual
Whereas the
people.
government can,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So the government can, cheerfully run debt.
Well, I would argue that some individuals can cheerfully run debt as well, and some governments can cheerfully run debt, but there's a lot of inequality in that. So, like, if you look at someone like Donald Trump, he accrued massive debts, not
Yep,
necessarily because he was
yep,
particularly
yep.
able to, and he also likewise hasn't really had to pay so far. Things may change, but so far he hasn't really had to pay any of them
Absolutely.
back.
So there's clearly a difference where the old story still holds good. If you're going to be in deficit or in debt, you should be in debt big time. And
Yeah,
when you're in debt big time, I mean billions, then the position of yourself and the bank changes. Because
yeah,
ultimately, if you think about this, supposing you and I ran into a debt crisis. A debt crisis is a situation where we say can't make the mortgage payments.
mm,
You know, so given that we are down to eating bare minimum, our income has fallen through the pandemic or whatever reason, and we can't. So once we eat, just our food bill happens to exceed our income. So we
mm.
cannot then pay the mortgage. So what does the bank actually do? Uh, it's only you've signed away your house. That's the basis on which you got the loan.
Yeah,
So they could end up taking your house and essentially selling it.
mm,
Okay, but if you happen to be in debt big time, and you don't have assets which, if you have assets which are less than the value of your debt, this is what caused the 2008 crash.
mm.
The fact that people had assets, i.e., houses, which were worthless because compared to the amount of debt that so they went into bankruptcy. So that is when you are bankrupt. So, but it's not in the bank's interest to make you bankrupt, because if they make you bankrupt, they'll get nothing back, zero. And how does it help them if you go to jail under the bankruptcy laws?
Yeah.
It doesn't.
Well, debatable what caused the financial crash, whether that's the root cause of it. We could debate that.
No, that may not be the root cause of it, but it's the symptomatic cause of it was the fact. What is it? What is individual household failure to do with it? Household failure is to do with the fact that you borrow huge amounts of money to buy properties on the assumption that the price of the property is going to go up, and so in some paper sense you remain liquid,
Yeah.
and the bank says, oh yeah, it doesn't matter if they owe us 1 million quid, their house is worth 5 million. Well, what if then there's a housing crash for whatever reason, and then the house, and they borrowed 1 million, and now the house is only worth 500,000? The bank is stuck. Well,
Yes.
literally stuck.
The
So,
bank was.
and,
I mean,
and, and
I feel like this is. But I mean, I feel like there's a lot to say about the financial crisis and some of these aspects of it. I mean, it is also highlighting something which you've already said, though, is the nature of how most debts work in our modern economy. Is that
yeah,
most debt is created for mortgage
yeah,
lending
and in the
and
end,
to capitalize
what
it. Yeah,
what laws do we have for dealing with debtors? You
yeah,
see, in the old days, what did they do when people, there are debtors prisons? You
yeah,
went into debt, and so it was only the threat of going to prison which enforced good behavior. But in the end, going to prison is a sign of the system breaking down, because the debt is never going to be recovered. Now, the thing with governments is they never go to prison. This can't happen to them. They can only go to prison if they're a poor country, in which case the IMF is the jailer. That whether debt is dangerous or pernicious or not depends to a large extent on what kind of system you have for dealing with it.
yeah.
And the fact is that in the end, it comes down to a negotiation between the person who's incurred the debt, the debtor, and the
Yes,
lender.
yeah.
And that discussion changes depending on the number.
The number
So if
and
I'm in debt to a
yeah,
small
yeah,
amount, if I'm in debt, I owe you a small amount, then all the bargaining power is with you. If I owe you a big amount, you have to be nice to me, because
yeah,
otherwise I'm going to say, okay, I can't pay. You can take
yeah.
my house, it's worth
Okay.
nothing. Help
So that's the
yourself.
yeah. I get. I think it depends on other things too, though. So, and the few things that I'm just thinking about is, firstly, it's not just the amount; it's the amount, which I think is implicit in what you're saying, but it's the power. So, that's why some countries have been able, debatable, lots of factors, but why some countries have been able to get into lots and lots of debt and not had to pay it back, and why other countries are not able to. And as you say, the IMF enforces loans differently in different countries, although that may all change. But there's many factors. The other thing that I'm thinking of, though, which I think is also important to state, is that we've recent history has had debtors' prisons where people that are in debt go to prison. But looking at a longer view of history, actually, being a creditor's been considered to be illegal. And I like how you're describing it now, which is just reminding us that actually debt is really a negotiation between two parties. And in today's economy, today's world, creditors have all the power. And some people would go further and argue that actually international institutions are just really. You kind of described it like this as well. You described it as the prison wing. Did you say the IMF is like the what did you describe it as? IMF
It's
is
like
the
the debtor's prison. I said
debtors.
it's
Exactly. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
it's the debtor's prison.
And
Yeah,
they're
it's the
enforcing
debtor's
the
prison.
rights of the creditor, which is important. Whereas if we had fair bargaining between debtors and creditors, which is ultimately what any debt relationship should be, we'd have people defending the people in debt, but we don't have anyone to do that.
Yeah, but it's also part of this has happened because of this kind of fractional reserve banking system, which we so cheerfully love, is that the bank actually lends money it doesn't have through leveraging. Okay,
I
if we
feel
had
like
a
I don't
system,
want to get onto this because it's too big.
I know we don't. I don't want to get onto it either, but
Because
I'm
I don't
simply
agree with
saying
you
that the
totally on
amount.
that.
One of
But
the
I want
reasons
to.
why the amount of debt is so big is precisely because of the fact that the banks lend what they don't have. So, in a simpler world, you would only be able to lend to me what your excess savings were in a given year, and in that sense, the total amount of debt, amount of loans would be much smaller than they are now. We are sitting on a debt mountain, both as
Possibly,
individuals
but
and so.
I don't know. I mean, I don't totally agree with that. I think that I definitely agree there's some massive problems with the banking system, and at the moment it's all geared up, unfortunately, to just lend money for for property, but I don't necessarily think we don't want. It doesn't mean we don't want people to be able to create new possibilities out of effectively trust and belief, which is what money kind of, on some level, you could argue
Yeah,
is.
money certainly works only on trust, and there's no other basis for it. I mean, otherwise bitcoins wouldn't work at all. So,
Yeah,
it only works because people don't think the bubble is going to burst, and it does burst eventually for most people. But certainly, the levels of debt are very high. Individual levels of debt are extremely high.
yeah,
There's a slight confusion about what people call the national debt, which they think of as being, what most people think of as a national debt is actually only the government debt. It's not the national debt. It's the debt of the government.
yeah.
It's what
Should
government
we talk
owes.
about that
It's what
next then?
government owes to.
Yeah.
It's what government owes to us.
Let's talk more now though about what some a bit more specifically about the different types of debt are. So the thing that is in the news is government debt, and you're about to define and talk about what that actually is then, and what that
Yeah.
might even
So,
mean.
so government debt, I think, is simply the debt of the U. In the case of the UK, it's the
Yeah,
debt of the UK government. It's
yeah,
what the UK government cumulatively has borrowed over a long period of time,
yeah,
minus the bits that it might have paid off over that time. Okay, so it's a net. It's the sum of the net borrowing of the UK government throughout its lifetime.
yeah. I don't think it's going to help. Does this help people think? What's the point we're trying to make?
I have no idea whether it helps people or not. It helps me to think
Well,
about it.
what is? So I think you're trying to make a point, which is that. So I think the point you're trying to make is that. So we've been arguing for like 10 minutes now about whether we can use this as an example, but
I don't mind if you don't use it. You can edit that. You can presumably cut that bit out, and that's
But the
fine.
point,
Just cut it out. But
what we're discussing is how a government's revenue, as with actually any accounting, can appear very different year by year, and there are things that you can
absolutely,
do which make it look like it's doing really well. Like, oh look, we've got a massive surplus. And Monojit's
yeah,
been giving some examples where governments can suddenly do something which looks like they've
yeah,
suddenly shifted all their books into the green, or they've done something. But
yeah.
actually, what they've done is
Although,
done something like sold
yeah,
off a huge asset, like sold
right.
off
But yeah,
the
and one of the things we never
telecom.
see,
Yeah.
one of the things we never see in any statement in the
Can
newspapers
we
or in
give some
government
more
accounts.
examples of that, though, actually? Clear
Yeah, sure,
examples
I
of
can give you.
the,
So
the
is government
telecom.
assets?
Yeah.
We don't see government assets anywhere. We only see the flow. We see,
Yes.
assets are also a stock. So against the debt, the government
Yeah.
debt has to be the government, the stock
Exactly.
of
Right.
assets.
Yeah.
Just like against your and my debt has to be the house.
Yeah.
Think
Yeah.
of how much property the government owns. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Um,
there are
uh,
definitely, so that's what's happening, and it happening in local councils and national and government. Is what's happening is lots of things are being sold off, so lots of property gets sold off. Money comes in, and in the short term, oh look, we've had a good year. But then
absolutely.
you see you've sold
But
off all
you've
your council housing, or you've sold off
Yeah,
the
exactly. And you can.
telecoms.
The thing is, you can
Yeah,
only sell the family jewels once.
yeah, yeah,
And that's what's happened. So, for example, people say, is debt a problem? Well, I don't know if it's a problem. So the UK's debt is roughly equal at the moment.
Before we do
It's
that, can we actually just have we properly or maybe I'm going too late. We're still on what is debt, and I think the thing that we're saying about debt is we're saying that there are different types of debt, government and household debt. Maybe I shouldn't have interrupted there. Maybe you should just go on to whether it's a problem. But I was just thinking, I thought you were going to talk about stuff like the trade deficit, because I think
okay.
that's also
So
quite important.
yep. So there's international debt. That is
Yeah.
genuine national debt. It's what we
Yeah,
owe to foreigners.
that's what we didn't get to. We said we were
And
going to
that's what we owe to foreigners. So that becomes genuine national debt.
Yes.
And that, for example, is just the opposite. But there's a strong relationship between what we owe to foreigners,
yeah,
and what the government debt is. And if you actually look at the national income accounts,
yeah,
you'll see a very close link between uh, the government debt, government deficit in any year. The government deficit in any year is equal to the net exports in a given year.
Is it? I think that's too. I don't want to. I don't know if I. It's not always.
Okay,
Is it?
but there's a clear,
Not in like Japan.
if the
It's
but
breaks down that
if the government spends a lot, okay,
yeah,
it's in terms of our foreign relationships, it's the same as individual spending a lot. We spend
yeah,
too much, so we import too much, so we run into trouble. We owe foreigners a lot of money, and the government it's the same thing. The difference, once again, is that when we do it as individuals, we're bound to take some kind of corrective action because we can't soak this gravy train forever.
Mm.
Some governments don't have to do it. Think about the US
Mm.
during the Vietnam War. It
Mm.
ran the biggest budget deficit in history. Okay, and that deficit was exactly equal, yeah, to what it owed to foreign nations. But the foreigners were willing to hold dollars.
Yeah.
And so the US got away with it. The US did not pay for the Vietnam War. We paid for the Vietnam War because the US ran a budget deficit. Huge. And then it had the cheek to turn around and tell us all, we must do sound finance. Yeah, you must do sound finance. What is sound finance? You know, so
I
so
think it's
that's
really important. I think this is one of the most important aspects of debt, which is often overlooked, particularly with people who might be on the left, who might be thinking about certain ways of financing stuff, is distinguishing between national and international debt, and they are really linked. So I mean, it does get a little bit technical when you start seeing if the government debt is the
unfortunately it
same.
does get a little bit technical, but if you can
However,
think
the
about it in a
general
simple way.
idea is that if you're running up, if your savings rate overall, whether individually or as a government, is high, you must be lending that money somewhere to other
Exactly. Yeah.
governments or other
Yeah.
people in other
Yeah.
countries,
Yeah.
and that is the simplest way to think about it.
Yeah.
And I think that's the easiest one. I don't necessarily think people need too much more than that. However, the thing for me, the thing that clouds it and makes it even worse than it looks on paper is that the UK borrows more, as I'm sure most people know, we borrow a lot from abroad. But I
Yeah.
think it's even worse than we think it is, because a lot of the way that we balance our books is by selling stuff abroad that I don't think we should be selling. So a lot of financial products and
Armaments,
what's that?
arms.
And
We
arms.
sell a lot of arms.
Yeah, but even more difficult to explain to people though is that because not just the UK, but the financial architecture encourages the prices to rise of some goods and to be lower for others. And this operates through things like financial markets and derivatives. They can manipulate prices of certain goods. So I don't think there's any reason why it is that some products, like the financial services industry, is valued so high, and the products of people like farmers or people that produce stuff is valued so
Exactly.
low.
No, but that
We're
your
getting on.
income is
In fact,
just
we're getting on to how to solve the international world, but I think it's too much for us to do in this episode.
yeah.
Let's just go back to what we're just
But
saying though, is that this is a really key part of debt, and it's the inequality and the amount of borrowing that we do from different countries,
yeah, yeah.
and that is a problem. That is not necessarily a problem. Well, this is a question: is it a problem? Maybe. So let us go on to that next. And do you think the UK is in too much debt? Should we give people a statistic? Maybe I should just have a look at what it is. The
Yeah,
last
just take a look.
I saw were on.
Well, I think it's
next one.
useful if you express it in terms of how big our GNP is.
Okay.
What's the debt as a ratio of GNP? I think at the moment it's about 1 to 1, if I'm not mistaken.
Close, yeah, I think so. If people want a place to go and look at statistics, I'm going to put some links. The Office for
Okay.
National Statistics is one that people use, but they only, it's so the last ones came out in the last release came out in end of January, I think. But I think I saw a more recent one quoted.
I don't think it matters whether how recent it is. If it's 6 months old, in the debt.
Well,
remember, debt is a stock. It changes very, very slowly. The flows are quite rapid, but the stock is huge compared to the flow. So it's pretty stable. So it doesn't matter when you look at it.
Yeah, but it is close. I think it was like about the last one I can see on the Office for National Statistics website is it's about 84% of GDP.
Okay, so let's not quibble. Let's say it's 1 to 1. That makes life really easy in terms for discussion.
Yeah.
So if you think about an individual, if your housing debt was only exactly equal to your annual income, you'd be laughing all the way to the bank, wouldn't you? Wouldn't you be delighted? My God, if people could get a home for a loan equal to their current income, we'd all be jumping up and down in excitement. So why is it that the nation has to worry so much about the fact that its debt level is exactly equal to its national income? I don't understand this paranoia about debt.
So you think it's fine?
I don't think it's a real big. And by the way, once again, remember, going back to the distinction between individuals and the government.
Yeah.
When if you have a mortgage of, say, if you're a young person in London, let's suppose, okay, like my daughter, Um, if you
If I
if
can
you
count
lived
as
in
young,
London,
that's like me as well.
sorry,
If
yeah,
I'm
you count
counted
as
as
young
young,
too.
that's also me.
You count,
I don't think
you
I'm
count as
any more
young,
before you know.
definitely. But anyway, so if they're say they're 30 and they're working in the kind of you know lower to middle echelons of the civil service or something like that, and they have an income of maybe £30,000, £32,000, something like that. Okay. Now, any kind of a flat in London costs 400,000. Any kind of a flat.
Mm.
So let's say it's 300,000 for argument's sake, and the income is it's 10 to 1. You'd have to borrow 10 times your income.
That's a
I
good
mean, our
reminder
national.
for people. Yeah, although that's a really good reminder that if you're an individual, you end up stacking up way more debt in
Yeah.
comparative
So
terms. Although we could
what?
also argue that's because the people are having to borrow too much for mortgages and the house prices are too high. But that's a different.
Yeah.
But I like it's a good analogy. I like that. So yeah, if you think
Yeah.
about it
But
as an
for the
individual,
government, but
yeah,
for the government, it's 1 to 1, and everybody's jumping up and down and saying it's too much. And I don't understand why, it's not okay. It's okay for individuals to incur debt, which is 10 times your income, but it's not okay for a government to hold debt, which is only
yeah.
1 times your
So
income.
that so
And
that's yeah. I think that's
furthermore,
good.
the
I like this.
individual's debt
Yeah,
is matched against something. It's matched against
yeah,
a house.
yeah.
But the government's debt is matched against all our national assets. If it really came to that, we could sell London Bridge, couldn't we?
Yeah, just sell. So I can think of
Yeah,
the
we
things
could sell Stonehenge. You know, and I've said this in the context of India frequently. The Indian government's debt is quite a big number.
yeah.
And everyone's going, oh my God, the debt is unsustainable. Come on, we can sell the Taj Mahal.
Can I just say on that though? Because it's reminding me of something. I get frustrated when people get annoyed with foreign investors for buying stuff, like for buying a lot of London has already been sold. That's one thing we should maybe just point out though. When we talk about, I'm not sure, London Bridge, I think we still got it, but most of London has already been sold. I just want to point out, which my view is that although you may be concerned about how much of London and how much of council housing and how much of our national utilities already have been sold. So we've already sold quite a lot of stuff. We sold all the gold in the Bank of England vaults. I think we've sold like our water, all our electricity companies. We've got. Have we still got the post office? Not sure. Bits of it, probably not.
Post
So we've
office is
sold off
privatized.
quite a lot. So, and I would also just say, like, people often get angry with foreign investors for buying property in London. It's like, no, that's a deliberate strategy. We need to do that to maintain our trade, to retain our basically to balance our books on some level. So I don't know how much more of London we can sell actually, Monojit. Maybe St Paul's Cathedral, we've still got that, and a few
Yeah,
things.
but it's not just London. I mean, how much would Americans who don't have these sorts of things, how much would they pay for Durham Cathedral? A huge number.
I don't think you're joking, are you? This is a genuine
No,
policy
this is
proposal.
no. I'm saying against debt, there
Yeah,
has to be a list of assets.
yeah.
That's the way you and I manage our finances. Why should the government be any bloody different?
Why did we sell the council housing off? Why didn't we sell off Durham Cathedral?
See, my favorite object for selling off, this is after we become a republic, is
Yes.
Buckingham Palace. We sell that off and we give the Queen a nice council house instead. And that
This
would be
is
that would be a
this
good way
is
of
a
going
solution
about
to
it.
COVID. We sell Buckingham Palace, and it's a solution to all the crises we've got in the monarchy. And I'm
Yep.
sure the Queen wants a break. We give her a really lovely, just a really
We
beautiful
give her
council
top quality
bungalow.
council house. We
We
are very
have
kind. Yeah,
a
we
bungalow or
lefties are
something.
very kind. We're not shooting anybody or doing what they did to the Romanovs in Russia.
Yeah, this is great. Okay, we'll get out. I mean,
And then
I like.
Harry and Meghan can come and visit because they're no longer having to put up with having to
We
live
solve
in
so many
Buckingham Palace.
problems. Okay, I love that. Okay. I feel like we probably could wrap up quite. I mean, we haven't discussed other stuff, but we've discussed quite a
So
lot. Why
the
do
other,
you think
let
then
me
we
say
should say other
quickly.
types of debt, not government debt? Are you concerned about other types of debt?
So international debt, I'm very concerned
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
And once again, the weaker nations, when they borrow from the IMF, there are all kinds of conditions, which conditionality loans come with this, that, and the third, and so on. Otherwise, they wouldn't get the loan. And once again, because it's given in the form of money, there's no reason to suppose that it's necessarily used for productive purposes. So 10 years down the road, the situation repeats itself and they go back to the IMF for another loan, and this carries on.
Yeah.
And this is debt perpetuation. And the debt can be written off by the IMF, and it frequently is written off. Say, okay, we'll write off your debt, we'll give you a new loan. And this is a clever trick, because what it does is They know that if they give them a loan, then some of that money will be invested in a physical project of some sort, which raises some revenue. So the IMF will get some interest payments, because otherwise they're going to get nothing. But the two classic cases in which I said three cheers for the third world, was when Mexico and Peru defaulted on their debt in grand style in the 1970s, 79, in fact, because there was a lot of oil money. OPEC had raised oil prices. A lot of oil money sloshing around in international banks owned by the Saudis and the Kuwaitis and whoever. And the banks were desperate to lend this money, so they lent without thought. They lent without checking whether or not this stuff was ever going to be used productively. Mm-hmm. And they lent money to Mexico and they lent money to Peru. And some of that money was frittered. It never generated enough interest payments. And so effectively, Mexico and Peru were in danger of defaulting on their loans. And they did a quick calculation. If we default, what will happen? This was the back bargaining. And they said, well, we'll be barred from the international borrowing market for a couple of years, and then it'll be business as normal, which is exactly what happened. So they said, sorry, we're not paying. End of problem. And they were barred. They weren't able to get loans for a short period. That's the difference between them, a national government defaulting, and you and I defaulting. We'll end up in the debtors prison. Mm. Nothing happened to the president of Mexico. Absolutely nothing. And I'm very pleased that he did what he did, because, Morgan Grenfell and people like that were, as far as I'm concerned, these financial houses were sinful people. So
I mean, there's tons of stuff here. I mean, like, in terms of how why a couple of countries have been able to default with I think they're the exceptions. I think there's lots of examples through history.
They are very much the exceptions, and it goes back to and the reason they were able to be the exceptions was because they were in seriously large amounts of it. Goes back to saying, they were in such large debt that, they were able to say, we're not paying this, and, you can't force us to do anything. And the old days when you could send a gunboat down the river, fortunately, are over. So, people can. But I think people are browbeaten, people are scared.
Just also point out in your example, though, is that the creditors behaved really irresponsibly. And there are lots of debts that exist in the world where we keep pointing the blame at the people in debt, but actually it's a two-sided
But it's the same thing as pointing to people who are in deficit, saying you're the bad person, you have to adjust. Yeah. Why do I have to adjust? The fact that I'm in deficit means you're in surplus. You can't have a deficit without somebody else being in surplus. That's impossible, because the sum of deficits and surpluses for the world is zero. Yeah. So why does one side have to adjust? And even in relatively rich countries, Greece versus Germany, as my friend and former student Yanis said, why does Greece have to bear the entire burden of adjustment? It's the Germans are the ones who are not spending enough.
Well, they should spend more. This is a very big issue, which I don't think we're going to have time for. But unfortunately, I agree to some extent with what, not your former student, Yanis Varoufakis, but the other side of the coin is Nigel Farage is currently extremely concerned about the imbalance in the Eurozone, which is what they have, as you've just highlighted. They have this massive imbalance of trade surplus between a trade surplus with Germany and deficits in other countries, and on multiple things linked to that. It is pulling apart. It is a really, really dangerous thing, and unfortunately, Nigel Farage is banging on about it, and I think he may well have some. He's not right on at all everything. Of course, absolutely not something. But some of his critiques of the Eurozone are rooted in some truth, which is quite concerning on some level.
I think that fundamental point was made by Yanis, which is that we don't have any fiscal alignment. We only have monetary alignment. We don't have any fiscal alignment. There's nothing to stop Greece being in huge deficit and Germany being in huge surplus, and we have no method for recycling surpluses. No method at all. Unlike the UK, where every part of the UK is in deficit except London and the Southeast. Every single part of the UK. Scotland is in deficit, Ireland is in deficit, Wales is in deficit, Northamptonshire is in deficit, everybody's in deficit. But how is this recycling done? Because essentially the Treasury picks up the bill. That's how it works.
Well, this is where I think there's the contentiousness between what we mean by how London is in surplus, but it's not clear. It's when you really dig into what that means and how that's been achieved. I have huge issues with that, and I started describing it earlier. It's because we've developed our economy around a particular type of a particular type of good that has been given value which actually is questionable, and there are many other options and many other ways that we could live
Oh,
that don't.
sure. You're thinking about the financial sector. I'm thinking of a very simple public finance type of argument, which is to say the government collects a certain amount of tax revenue from London. It spends a certain amount of money in London. And so what's the difference between those two numbers? It's a positive number. It actually collects more in taxes in London than it
Yeah,
spends. And that's also true of the Southeast. And it's not true of any other part of the UK. So it's similar to the Greece versus Germany kind of issue in some ways. But we have a mechanism for recycling surpluses, and they don't. And this is
yeah. I'm
because
just pointing
essentially,
out though that there is still this issue which is linked to our trade deficit, which is that our economy is based around finance. So the reason for that is because the jobs that people do in London are seen as more valuable,
yeah,
and there's loads of
yeah,
loads of.
yep. Well, taking all that doesn't alter the fact at all that, in the present circumstances, if I was an MP in, say, Sunderland, okay, or somewhere in the Northeast, which is a deprived area and people are poor and suffering and unemployment is high, I would be arguing very strongly for saying, why are we using Barnett formula to subsidize Scotland and Northern Ireland? Why aren't we using the Barnett formula to subsidize Sunderland?
Hmm.
And the Scots always have this argument saying, actually, we're not. They don't recognize the defense of the Barnett. The defense of is that every part of the UK is effectively getting a subsidy of some kind from the Treasury, and the Treasury is issuing bonds to cover for that. There's no mechanism like that in Europe. Nothing like it. So that is why there's going to be permanent. But the good thing about not having a mechanism to paper over the cracks is the conflict comes out into the open. Whereas our conflict is hidden. Our conflict is hidden, and there is serious conflict in these kinds of issues. And you can see why one day, there will be demands when we have this fracturing of the United Kingdom, which I believe is coming. You'll have demands for people saying, we're going to go it alone and declare UDI or something, and the rest of the country can go to the dogs. We don't care. And that is pretty much how London and the Southeast thinks about the rest of the country. They really, have no concept of what's happening beyond the wash. Absolutely no idea. Neither do the MPs. So it is, to me, it's a really worrying thing. The fracturing of areas which are relatively poor with areas which are relatively well off.
Well, I have views on this, which I think I don't want to spend a lot more time talking about this. It's a big separate issue, but it's still this notion of poverty and what's poor and what's rich and how those things have been created and shaped by decisions that have been made, which means that actually it is of course the case that earned income and tax receipts are higher in some areas than others, but that hasn't just happened by accident. Like there's a range of policies why that's happened.
I'm not disputing that for a second. It's because certain occupations are grotesquely overpaid, and most of them happen to be concentrated in London and the Southeast, and they are grotesquely overpaid. So if you changed all of that, and you gave more value to nurses and less value to, and more value to home carers and people like that, you would change some of that. Okay, and it may be then that you would get a different situation, which would be that London would be in deficit, and they would be receiving, essentially receiving subsidies from some Liverpool, and that's
Yeah,
entirely possible.
and
It
it's
wouldn't,
really,
it would, and it would,
really
but
fundamental
but it
question.
wouldn't alter my argument. My argument is not about who's paying for it. It would. My argument is that we have in place a system which allows deficits and surpluses in different parts of the country to be managed, and the EU simply hasn't got that, and that is why Farage has got a point that the EU has no way of managing that except through conflict.
So we've been talking for quite a long time. I think it's probably time to wrap up now. So do you want a quick summary, Monojit? Any quick summary points you want people to take home with them?
So debt by itself is not necessarily damaging. It depends on the circumstances on which it's created and what provision there is for managing that debt, paying it off, etc. Government debt is often mistaken as national debt, but it's not. The government is in a unique position to create debt because it can borrow from its own citizens, and there is no particular pressure on the government to return for debt to be, if you like, liquidated.
Yeah,
Because
if it's borrowed from its own citizens, and that's
yeah,
different if it's
exactly,
borrowed
and
internationally. That's
also,
a
yeah,
distinction.
and we don't, many of us have own government bonds, for example, whose price is half of what it was when the bond was issued, But we're getting interest payments on it. We don't think the government is going to default and stop paying interest on its debts. So the UK government is under, I don't think, is under any great pressure to repay, to reduce its debt significantly. International debt is another matter, and some countries, the poorest countries, are in the worst situation. They're the ones who are under enormous pressure to return what they owe to the IMF or whoever. But they're having an example, some very courageous and sensible examples of third world countries which took debt and didn't pay it back, and in the end, nothing much happened. So it's the creditors have to take responsibility. Who are you lending to and why are you lending to them? Are you lending to raise the productive capacity of the borrower or not? A mortgage loan does raise productive capacity because you end up owning an asset, which is your house, which you could consider, for example, if it was big enough, you could consider, say, I'm going to use it as a productive asset because I'm going to rent out a room or something in my house or whatever it is. Uh, and that's a form of earning. A student loan is a form of saying, okay, I'm lending against future income of this person. And it's a productive loan because this person is going to get more productive as a result of this and earn a higher income, et cetera, et cetera. But not all loans are like that. Sometimes the creditor just says, I've got this money, I don't know what to do with it, I'll just lend it. And that's what has fueled a large amount of what I call useless lending, which didn't really achieve anything, didn't raise productivity. Loans can
This
only
is
be
a long
justified
story,
when they.
Monojit, and I feel like you've raised lots of new things, which I now want to come back at you on. So I think I'll just let
Okay,
them sit. Are you happy with your summary?
okay, that's fine. That's fine. Good.
Okay. Can I just add something? So I think I also just want to make the point that we've talked about very narrow forms of debt. Debt is a huge concept that basically drives all of human existence, really. Like, that's why it's so woven into every religious text. We think about debt in so many different ways: personal debts, karmic debts, all this sort of thing. I would argue that actually the way that it's been manifested into economics is very, very narrow, and we have a bit of a tension, therefore, between the financial debts that people owe and what we actually might think where debt really lies. So lots of countries that are currently in debt, particularly countries in the global south, I don't think they should be in debt. If anything, we should be paying back debts to them. So there's lots of imbalances which financial debts don't necessarily reflect debt in its broadest concept. And I like also what Monojit, you just saying about creditors. We've also got to really look at both sides of this. So we always blame people that are in debt, but also, of
Yep.
course, we must
Yep.
look at how they got into debt, who lent them the money.
Yep.
And sometimes
Yep.
the creditors need forgiveness, not the debtors. They need forgiveness for behaving in such irresponsible ways and lending all this money.
Yep.
They don't always
Well,
even have it, Monojit. Banks don't need to lend money that they've got. That's what we've established. So sometimes people will create money for people to borrow for something, but they didn't even have the money in the first place. So I've just added more issues into my own summary.
yeah.
But you want to come
So
back on something?
in that story, part of that, if you go back historically, there's never been a creditor's prison, as far as I'm aware, anywhere. There's only been a debtor's.
Okay, so yeah, that is a good point actually, because we've had debtors' prisons.
Never.
Before we had debtors' prison, it was outlawed to charge interest, and you weren't really allowed
only
to be.
Only in the West, not everywhere. Only in the Western world. It was outlawed to charge interest. It was outlawed. Usury was outlawed because you shouldn't charge
made
interest
it legal in the UK.
Above a certain level. So so usury was outlawed. And in medieval Europe, when people took this business very seriously, of course, getting loans was extremely hard.
But in countries like in Islam, it's outlawed still. But I guess there aren't any prisons for anyone.
But then people get around that. It's very easy to get loans in there. And that Islam is very young. Remember, the world is much older. So was debt banned in Africa before the coming of Islam? I doubt it. Certainly wasn't banned in India, as far as I'm aware, or in China, as far as I'm aware. But what were people able to lend? Since the entire currency was based on gold, the amount of lending and borrowing must have been very, very small, I suspect. I mean, I'm no economic historian, so I don't know what happened in 3000 BC.
Well,
it couldn't have been big.
there are very complex systems of credit that existed way before we had money or currencies or gold.
Oh yeah. No, money is neither here nor there. I've always said that. It's a kind of made up thing.
Is this a summary, Monojit? I feel like we're just having a discussion. Do we need to? I think I'm okay with this, though. I think I'll just put it out as it is.
But yeah, it's a kind of a summary.
I think it's a summary. Yeah, I feel. Well, yeah. What do we? Yeah, I think I think we should stop then. I think we should say. I think what the good thing is we've said that we don't think government debt's too much of a problem. That's what you said. I think that the government debt is symptomatic of lots of other types of debt which are problematic. So I think, for example, there's people are in loads of debt in the UK, and I think it's a real concern. I think we should be looking to renegotiate debts, and it's really is. We have got way too much debt.
Yeah, and it's not so difficult. Yeah. If we write off the debts of poor people, it's not going to create a huge big financial wave. We've seen that.
The opposite. It'll probably help.
Yeah, and we've noticed that when rich people write off their debts, nothing happens.
Exactly. So I think that's a good place to end. Is that actually we think it's shocking to write off and renegotiate debts, but actually that's what debts are really for. Debts are a contract between a lender and a borrower. They're always open to be renegotiated and changed, and we don't have to accept the status quo as it is.
And there's no God-given law which says you can't. It's like renegotiating a wage. I don't see the problem with that. I just don't understand why renegotiation is a bad thing. Yeah.
Sure. All right then, that's good. I think I'll say goodbye then. So I don't know if we want to say. So thank you so much for making some time to talk.
Not at all. As always very nice to talk to you. Let's talk about the labour market and unemployment next time.
We wanted to talk. Yeah, that's our next one. All right then.
Yeah, that is such a big thing. It's something which involves almost everybody's been in the labour market at some point or another, and had unhappy experiences, and we should talk about why that is.
Okay, and also, I'm up for getting rid of the whole work as a concept, but we can talk about that. I'm talking unemployment. Yeah, let's talk about that next time. Okay, I just wanted to say a massive thank you to Monojit for joining me, and also to you for watching this and making some time to figure out all this really big stuff happening in the economy right now. So yeah, thanks for coming here. You can probably tell that me and Monojit have actually got quite different views on a lot of stuff. We could have spent a lot more time unpicking some stuff like fractional reserve banking, money, balance sheets, the nature of how government works, lots of things we could have unpicked more. But I hope this was a good starting point, and I hope you found it really interesting. And although we've got different viewpoints, I hope it's also clear that all economic concepts are up for debate and discussion. In fact, as are a lot of economic contracts, like debt contracts, they're also up for debate and discussion and renegotiation, particularly now as we're coming out of a COVID pandemic. If you are still here, I would love it if you click the old like button, that'd be great. And do subscribe to my channel. I'll be doing more interviews and chats with Monojit. The next one we're going to talk about is employment. If you've got questions on that, or just generally other sort of comments and things you want us to talk about, or you want to hear Monojit answer, or just pop them in the comments. That's what you can do. That'd be great. And we'll try and answer them. What else? I did an interview with someone called Dr. Leander Binderwood about money, which comes at this issue of debt from a very, very, very different angle, covers very different stuff. It's very philosophical and pretty interesting, I think. So you could watch that. I'll put a link to it there, and you can watch that or in the comments as well. So yeah, you can watch that if you want to, of course, and do whatever you want to within reason, as long as you're not harming someone else. That's the goal, isn't it? It's what I want our whole economy to be like, really, just freedom, but just not quite harming so many other people. That's what would be nice, wouldn't it? Anyway, I think we've finished now, so I'm going to go. Thank you so much for watching, and have a lovely rest of day. What are you going to do? Doesn't matter, does it? It does matter, but it matters to you, not to me. I don't need to ask it to you, so no. Yeah. Well, that's a positive note to end on. Is it? Okay, I think I might have to edit some of that. It's got too long now. We're going an hour. So what do we turn?
Yeah, no, you're going to have to edit quite a lot. It's very long.
Too long. I might even end at the bit.